Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to our deep dive. We'll be taking a look at George Orwell's 1984 and how it relates to the current American political landscape.
All right.
And we'll be referencing this academic article, George Orwell's 1984, A Mirror for the Current American Political Landscape.
Okay.
And with that, let's just jump right in.
Sounds good. So,
It's really interesting.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's fascinating to see how this fictional world that Orwell created
Yeah.
captures these patterns of power and control
Right.
and manipulation that seem to echo throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And the article actually analyzes events
Huh?
up to late 2023 and early 2024,
Oh, wow.
and argues that some of these themes that Orwell wrote about are finding unsettling parallels
Yeah.
in current American political trends.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So before we dive into the specific, maybe we can kind of set the stage here a little bit.
Sure.
For those who might not be familiar with 1984,
Yeah.
it depicts a totalitarian state.
Called Oceania,
Mm-hmm.
that's ruled by this all-powerful party.
Mm-hmm.
And the party exerts total control over every aspect of life,
Yeah.
manipulating information,
Yeah.
rewriting history, using surveillance
Right.
and fear to maintain absolute power.
It's really a picture of what can happen when power is left unchecked.
Right. And, the novel centers on this protagonist,
Yeah.
Winston Smith, who tries to rebel
Mm-hmm.
against the party's oppressive regime.
Yes, and through Winston's struggles,
Yeah.
Orwell really explores these themes of totalitarianism, propaganda,
Right.
surveillance, and the suppression of individual thought and freedom.
It's
What makes 1984 so enduring, I think, is its exploration of the human condition under these really extreme conditions of control.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of truth and power and the fragility of individual autonomy.
Yeah.
It's a warning and,
Yeah.
a call to be vigilant.
Yeah, absolutely. And the article makes it very clear that,
Yeah.
it's not claiming that we're becoming Oceania.
Right.
It's not saying that America is turning into this
Exactly.
dystopian nightmare.
It's more nuanced than that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's using 1984
Yes.
as a framework for critical analysis.
Exactly.
It's saying that there are certain trends in American politics that echo some of the themes of the novel,
Right.
albeit in, less extreme forms.
Uh-huh.
So why don't we jump into
Okay.
the first parallel
Right.
that the article draws,
Yeah.
which is the manipulation of information and this rise of what it calls alternative facts.
Yeah. And Orwell really captures this concept brilliantly through his ideas of
Yes.
doublethink and Newspeak.
Right.
Doublethink is this ability to hold two contradictory beliefs
Yes.
simultaneously without even acknowledging the contradiction.
It's wild.
It's like the mental gymnastics that you have to do to accept the party's version of reality, even when it clashes with your own perceptions and experiences.
It's almost like a form of
Right.
self-hypnosis or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like you're convincing yourself of something that, deep down isn't true.
Yeah.
But you have to believe it to survive.
Right. And they're constantly being told these things like war is peace.
Right.
Freedom is slavery.
Ignorance is strength.
Ignorance is strength.
Yes. All
So,
these
yeah.
contradictory slogans.
Yeah.
And through doublethink, they learn to accept them as truth.
Yeah, it's a chilling example of how language
Absolutely.
can be used to control thought.
And to control perception.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's Newspeak,
Right.
which is like the official language of the party.
It's designed to limit thought
Right.
by eliminating words that could express
Right.
rebellious or critical ideas.
Right.
So the goal is to really narrow the range of thought to the point where even conceiving of rebellion becomes impossible.
Right.
It's like they're trying to control the very way that people think.
It's like they're removing the tools.
Yeah, exactly.
To even have those
Yes.
thoughts in the first place.
It's taking away the vocabulary of dissent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the article connects these Orwellian concepts to the rise of alternative facts
Yes.
in current political discourse.
Right.
And it argues that this deliberate use of terms like fake news to discredit legitimate sources of information,
Yes.
coupled with just the flood of misinformation online,
Right.
creates this environment where truth
Becomes slippery.
becomes very slippery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very difficult to grasp.
Yeah. And the article brings up a good point.
Yeah.
A good example of this
Mm-hmm.
is the 2017 debate over the size of the presidential inauguration crowd.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
I do.
Despite clear photographic evidence that, these conflicting narratives persisted.
Exactly.
Each side accusing the other of manipulating reality.
Uh-huh.
And the article argues that...
And this really exemplifies how objective truth can be eroded when alternative narratives, even those contradicting readily available evidence, are consistently promoted and amplified.
Yeah, it's almost like choosing to believe what you want to believe, regardless of what the evidence shows.
Exactly.
And I think that raises a really important question for all of us.
Yeah.
How can we as citizens discern truth in an environment where information is so easily manipulated and distorted?
For a political gain.
Yeah, for political gain.
It's a question that I think becomes even more urgent when we consider the next parallel the article explores, which is the rise of surveillance technologies and their implications for individual privacy and freedom.
And that's where that whole idea of Big Brother comes in.
Oh, yeah.
In 1984.
That's right.
This omnipresent, watchful entity.
Everywhere you look.
Everywhere you look.
Always watching.
Yeah, that just symbolizes total state control and casts a chilling shadow over every aspect of citizens' lives. The telescreens are everywhere. Transmitting information and surveillance. Monitoring every word and action.
And the article really draws a direct line from Big Brother to the pervasive surveillance technologies that we encounter today.
Right.
I mean, think about
it's everywhere.
Social media monitoring, data collection by tech companies, government surveillance programs. All these contribute to an environment where our digital footprints are constantly being tracked. And analyzed.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, to understand the historical context here. The article highlights the Edward Snowden revelations from 2013, which exposed the vast scope of the NSA's data collection program.
Yeah, those leaks really shook public trust and sparked a debate about the balance between security and freedom that continues to this day.
Yeah, it's still going on. And that debate has only intensified in recent years.
Absolutely.
The article cites new allegations from 2023 regarding data sharing between these major tech companies and government agencies.
Yeah, it's like the lines are blurring.
The lines are very blurry between private information and government access.
Exactly. And these developments raise some really fundamental questions that I think echo the concerns at the heart of 1984. What are the limits of government surveillance? What are the implications of constant monitoring for individual autonomy and freedom of expression? How can we ensure that these powerful technologies are used responsibly and ethically?
These are tough questions.
Very tough questions.
With no easy answers.
And as we become increasingly reliant on digital technologies, it's crucial that we engage in these discussions and demand transparency and accountability from those in power.
Absolutely.
We can't just let them operate in the shadows.
We can't just give up our privacy. Why don't we move on to another parallel?
Okay.
And I think this is one that's really relevant today. And that is the use of division and polarization as a means of control.
That's a big one.
That's a really big one. The 1984, the party maintains its power by keeping the populace divided and fearful. They manufacture these external enemies, fuel internal conflicts to prevent any kind of unified resistance.
They know that a divided population is much easier to control.
Exactly.
And
the article argues that we're witnessing a similar phenomenon.
it's not as extreme.
Not as extreme, but it's definitely there in the increasing polarization of American politics.
The us versus them mentality has become so pervasive.
And it's fueled by divisive rhetoric and the exploitation of these social and cultural anxieties. It's interesting because the article doesn't take sides in these cultural and political divides.
It's like they say one side is right or wrong.
Instead, it points to the tactics that are being used
by both sides.
Using
inflammatory language, demonizing opponents to solidify their base, and discredit dissenting voices.
That's a very effective strategy.
Very effective.
Unfortunately. And some specific examples that the article cites are the contentious debates over immigration policies.
That's a big one.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Discussions of systemic racism and
the rise of
politically segregated online spaces.
Yeah, echo chambers.
Echo chambers, where you only hear what you already want to hear.
Information that confirms your existing beliefs.
Yeah, and you never have to confront an opposing viewpoint.
And it makes it very difficult to have meaningful conversations.
And the article really emphasizes the danger of this trend, suggesting that it creates a climate where critical thinking and nuanced discussion are replaced by blind allegiance and ideological purity.
It's like you're either with us or against us.
Exactly.
There's no room for nuance.
No room for nuance, no room for...
Or compromise.
Compromise.
Yeah.
It's a climate where listening to and understanding opposing viewpoints is seen as a weakness rather than a necessary step towards finding solutions.
Like we've lost the ability to disagree agreeably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that this type of division is often exacerbated by the very technologies that we were just talking about.
Absolutely. Social media algorithms designed to keep us engaged often serve to reinforce our existing biases.
Right.
You know, they feed us a steady stream of information that confirms what we already believe. It's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
We become increasingly isolated within our own echo chambers, further entrenching our beliefs and making it even harder to bridge the divide.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me that Orwell...
Writing in the pre-digital age.
Seemed to foresee this.
Yeah.
With such remarkable clarity.
He was ahead of his time.
He really was.
Yeah. So, moving on to another parallel that the article explores.
Okay.
This is the control of historical narratives.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in 1984, the party constantly rewrites history to fit its ideology, effectively erasing any events or figures that contradict its narrative. And you see this most clearly in the Ministry of Truth, where Winston works.
Yes.
His job is literally to alter historical records, making it seem like the party is always right and always has been.
Yeah. And it's
a chilling example of how those in power can manipulate our understanding of the past to serve their own interests.
Yes, and the article suggests that we're seeing attempts to influence historical narratives in the U.S. as well. Though obviously not to such a blatant degree.
Not as overt.
Not as overt.
Yeah.
But it highlights
the debates.
The debates over the teaching of American history.
Yeah.
Particularly discussions around critical race theory and the inclusion of certain books in school curriculums. These debates, the article argues, reflect a deeper struggle over who gets to define the past.
Exactly.
And whose perspectives are considered valid.
Whose stories are told. And whose stories are silenced.
Yeah, and it's not just about which events are included in textbooks. It's about how those events are interpreted and framed.
Exactly.
And the article points to instances of historical denialism where certain groups attempt to downplay or outright deny the occurrence of events that make them uncomfortable.
Especially when it comes to sensitive topics like slavery, segregation, the treatment of Native Americans.
These uncomfortable truths.
Exactly.
That we'd rather just sweep under the rug.
Brush aside. Pretend they didn't happen.
And what's fascinating to me is that the article doesn't take sides.
It does.
In these debates.
It simply points out that they exist.
Yeah. And that they reflect this deeper struggle over power and narrative control.
Yes. It's almost like each side is vying for the right to shape the collective memory of the nation.
And that obviously has implications for
it. shapes how we view the present and the future.
Yeah. If we can't agree on what happened in the past, how can we possibly learn from it? And move forward.
Yeah, it's like
in a constructive way.
We're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Yes.
If we can't even acknowledge them honestly.
Right. And that brings us to another parallel.
Okay.
That the article explores, which is the allure of strong leaders.
Yes.
And the potential for personality cults to undermine democratic values.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Because in 1984, Big Brother,
Right.
this enigmatic figurehead of the party, he's more than just a leader. He's an object of worship.
Yeah.
A symbol of unwavering authority.
Yeah. His image is everywhere.
Everywhere.
And citizens are expected to display unquestioning loyalty and devotion.
Absolutely.
And critical thinking about his actions or policies.
That's strictly forbidden.
Strictly forbidden.
Yeah.
And the article connects this to the rise of what it calls strong personality cults around certain political leaders in the U.S.
And it argues that while charisma and strong leadership can be positive qualities, they can also be exploited to create an environment where critical thinking and dissent are stifled.
Exactly.
You know, when loyalty to a leader becomes paramount, any form of criticism can be seen as disloyalty or even treason.
It's like you're not allowed to question the leader.
Yeah, and the article is careful to point out that this isn't about any particular leader or political party.
It's a tendency.
It's a tendency that can happen.
That can manifest.
On either side.
Across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
The danger lies in elevating a leader to a position where their pronouncements are accepted without question. And their actions are shielded from scrutiny.
So that blind faith.
That can be so dangerous.
And that type of unquestioning devotion is antithetical to the principles of a healthy democracy, which thrives on debate, dissent, and accountability.
We need to be able to evaluate our leaders critically.
We need to be able
to assess their policies and actions based on their merits, not simply on their ability to inspire fervent devotion.
We can't just blindly follow. We have to think for ourselves.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another chilling parallel that the article examines, which is the suppression of dissenting voices and the potential for cancel culture to stifle freedom of expression.
And this is where things get really tricky.
Yeah.
Because in 1984, the party ruthlessly silences any voices that challenge its authority.
They have the thought police.
The thought police, a constant threat, monitoring citizens for any sign of unorthodox thinking. Dissenters are subjected to imprisonment, torture, even forced re-education. The goal is to create an atmosphere of fear where even the thought of rebellion becomes unthinkable.
And the article acknowledges that, you know, cancel culture in the U.S., while concerning,
operates on a different scale. And with different methods.
It doesn't involve, you know, government-sanctioned violence.
Not in the same way.
Or imprisonment.
But it argues that the intent can be similar. To silence those with opposing viewpoints. To shame them into conformity. And to create an environment where certain ideas are deemed unacceptable.
You're not allowed to even think certain thoughts.
And the article cites examples from early 2024. Where public figures faced intense online backlash, calls for boycotts, even career repercussions for expressing views deemed offensive or controversial. And it argues that this type of pressure, whether it comes from the left or the right, can have a chilling effect on free speech.
It's almost like a form of self-censorship.
You're afraid to speak your mind.
Because you're afraid of the consequences.
Exactly.
And it's a complex issue.
Very complex.
I mean, on the one hand, holding people accountable
for harmful or offensive speech
is important. But on the other hand, creating an environment where people are afraid to express their views, even unpopular ones.
Even if you disagree with them.
That's a threat.
It's a threat to a free and open society.
Yes, and I think finding that right balance, you know, protecting free speech while also combating
hate speech,
and misinformation is one of the biggest challenges that we face in the digital age.
Absolutely. And another parallel that the article explores is the use of fear and anxiety as a tool of political control.
Because in 1984,
fear is the party's primary weapon. You know, citizens are constantly bombarded with propaganda about external enemies, internal threats, the ever-present danger of rebellion. This constant state of fear makes them more compliant and less likely to question the party's authority.
And they have that daily ritual.
Right, the 2 minutes hate.
The 2 minutes hate.
Where citizens are forced to express their rage and hatred towards the party's enemies.
Yes, it's
this visceral display of emotion designed to create a sense of unity and to reinforce the party's narrative.
It's very effective.
Very effective.
And the article argues that we see similar tactics being used in contemporary American politics.
Right. Again, not to the same extreme.
Not to the same extreme, but it's there.
It's definitely there.
You know, fear is frequently invoked to influence voters, often by exaggerating threats or creating a sense of crisis.
Yeah, making people feel like they're in danger.
Like the world's about to end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this fear-based messaging can be incredibly effective.
It is.
Because it taps into our primal instincts. And bypasses rational thought.
You don't even think, you just react.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, the article gives some concrete examples. It mentions the way crime statistics are often used to create a sense of danger.
Even when crime rates are declining.
Even when they're going down.
Yeah.
It also talks about fear-mongering related to immigration.
Where
anxieties about job security and national identity are exploited for political gain.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the fear of terrorism.
Oh.
Which is a very real threat.
A very real threat.
But it's often
amplified.
Amplified.
And used to justify policies that erode civil liberties. And expand government surveillance.
It's like they're using this fear to justify
taking away our freedoms.
Yeah,
it's a dangerous cycle.
Yeah, and the article really challenges us
to
be critical of these fear-based narratives.
To not just accept them at face value.
To not just buy into it.
Yeah.
To really examine the evidence.
To look at the facts.
Yeah.
And to resist the urge to surrender our freedoms. In exchange for a false sense of security.
Yeah, because sometimes that security is an illusion.
It is. It's a trade-off that we have to be very careful about making.
We have to be very careful about.
Yeah.
Yeah, because fear can be such a powerful motivator.
It can.
But it can also be a tool of manipulation.
Absolutely.
And we need to be aware of how it's being used.
To influence us.
Yeah. And to make decisions based on facts and reason.
It's not on emotion and fear.
Not just our gut reaction.
Yeah. And that leads us to another disturbing parallel. That the article highlights. Which is the erosion of objective truth. In an age of misinformation.
This is a big one.
This is huge.
Yeah. And it's absolutely central to 1984.
Yeah.
The party's control over information is total. They constantly distort and rewrite history to fit their narrative. And citizens are forced to accept their version of reality as truth.
Yeah.
The very concept of objective truth is called into question.
It's almost like truth doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, it becomes fluid and malleable. You know, this reality that serves the party's interests.
And the article argues that while we're not living in a
totalitarian state,
like Oceania, we are seeing a similar,
though less extreme, erosion of objective truth. In the digital age. I mean, think about the concept of truth decay. A term that's been gaining traction in recent years.
I've heard that.
It refers to this declining reliance on facts. And evidence in public discourse.
It's like we're moving away from facts.
Yeah, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish fact from fiction.
It's like everybody's got their own truth now.
And this erosion of trust in shared reality makes it really hard to have meaningful conversations. About complex issues.
It's hard to even have a conversation when you can't agree on the basic facts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and the article cites this 2023 report showing a significant increase in misinformation on social media platforms.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is the way these algorithms work.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, they prioritize engagement over accuracy.
They want to keep you scrolling.
Yeah.
They want to keep you clicking.
Yeah.
And so they feed you content.
Yeah.
That's going to evoke a strong emotional response.
It doesn't matter if it's true. Whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
It's about getting that reaction.
And that creates these echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where misinformation can spread. Unchecked.
Yeah.
It's like a virus.
And it creates a situation where competing narratives battle for dominance. And objective truth becomes increasingly elusive.
It's hard to know what to believe anymore.
Yeah, and we're all susceptible to this.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter what your background is.
For political beliefs, your education.
It can happen to anyone.
We're all vulnerable.
And so we need to develop these critical thinking skills.
Absolutely.
And be aware of our own biases.
Right.
Be skeptical of information.
Especially when it comes from sources.
Right.
That have a vested interest in shaping our perceptions.
Yeah.
You know, the article really encourages us to seek out diverse perspective.
Don't just get all your information from one source.
Read different things.
Right.
Talk to different people.
Talk to people you disagree with.
Exactly. And be willing to change your mind when presented with new evidence.
It's okay to change your mind.
It's a sign of intellectual growth.
It's a sign that you're learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And building these habits of critical thinking, I think, is essential for navigating this complex information landscape.
The digital age.
Of the digital age, Yeah. Now, let's shift gears a bit and examine how the article connects economic disparity in 1984 to modern American politics. Because in the novel, Orwell subtly portrays economic disparity as a means of control. You know, it's not as explicitly addressed as some of the other themes, but the stark contrast between the lavish lives of the inner party members and the meager existence of the proles.
Right. They have nothing.
It speaks volumes. You know, the party understands that keeping the masses preoccupied with basic survival makes them less likely to question the power structure.
It's like a distraction technique.
It is.
Keep them busy.
Keep them busy. Keep them struggling to survive.
Struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And they won't have the time or the energy.
To think about anything else.
To think about the bigger picture.
Yeah. And the article links this to the growing economic inequality in the U.S.
Which is a real problem.
Yeah.
And it argues that politicians often exploit this issue for political gain.
It's a very effective tactic, unfortunately.
It is. It's a way to divide people.
Yeah.
You know, pit them against each other.
Right.
And distract them from the real issues. Yeah. The article highlights how politicians might leverage economic anxieties to garner support.
To get votes.
Yeah. While failing to implement meaningful policies.
Right.
To address the root causes of inequality.
It's all talk.
Yeah, a lot of talk.
No action.
Not a lot of action.
And it's a pattern that repeats throughout history.
Yeah.
You know, those in power exploit existing disparities to maintain their position.
It's a classic power move.
It is.
And it's effective.
Very effective.
Unfortunately.
The article points out that this tactic creates resentment and division among the populace, diverting attention from those who actually hold power.
It's like a magician's trick.
It is.
Look over here.
Yeah.
Don't look over there.
Don't pay attention to what I'm doing.
Right.
Pay attention to this shiny object over here.
And by keeping the focus on the symptoms of economic inequality.
Yeah, the poverty. The lack of opportunity.
Yeah.
Politicians can avoid addressing the systemic issues that create these problems.
They don't want to solve the problems.
They don't want to fix the system.
They just want to keep using it to their advantage.
Exactly.
And as long as people are struggling to make ends meet, they're not going to have the time, energy, or resources
to engage in political activism or hold those in power accountable.
They're too busy just trying to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article really reminds us that a healthy democracy requires a certain level of economic fairness. You know, when a large segment of the population is struggling, it becomes easier for those in power to exploit their anxieties and erode their freedoms.
It's like they're taking advantage of people.
They are.
When they're at their most vulnerable.
At their most vulnerable.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that economic justice and democratic values
are inextricably linked.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
They go hand in hand. Now let's turn our attention to a specific event that the article analyzes through the lens of 1984.
Okay.
The January 6th Capital Riot.
Yeah, that was
a dark day.
A dark day for American democracy.
Absolutely.
And it really raised some serious questions about the stability of our institutions.
It did, and the article argues that the Capitol Riot wasn't just this spontaneous outburst of violence.
It felt like it came out of nowhere.
It did, but it was a culmination of many of the trends we've been talking about.
Right.
Misinformation, charismatic leadership, the erosion of trust in institutions, and the manipulation of fear and anger.
It's like all these things came together.
Yeah, all these threads converging.
In this one moment.
In this one very dark moment.
Yeah, and the article points out that a significant portion of the population had come to believe in this false narrative of a stolen election.
A narrative that was actively promoted by certain political leaders and amplified through social media.
And it's that amplification that I think is so key.
It is, because it allows these false narratives to spread so quickly and to reach such a wide audience.
And when people believe these things, they're willing to do things.
They're willing to take action.
That they wouldn't normally do.
And in this case, that action was violence.
Yeah, violence against their own government.
It's a sobering reminder of how fragile democratic norms can be.
It really is.
And how easily they can be exploited by those seeking power.
And the article also discusses the role of digital platforms and algorithms in creating echo chambers and reinforcing biases.
Right.
It suggests that the very design of social media can contribute to the spread of misinformation and the polarization of society.
Absolutely, because those algorithms are designed to keep us engaged.
Right.
They prioritize content that is emotionally charged and provocative, regardless of its accuracy.
It doesn't matter if it's true.
As long as it gets you to click.
Click.
Yeah.
And this creates a situation where misinformation and inflammatory rhetoric can spread like wildfire.
It does, and the article argues that this dynamic played a significant role in the events leading up to the Capitol Riot.
It's like they created the perfect conditions.
It did.
For something like this to happen.
Yeah, and the article really emphasizes that the Capitol Riot should serve as a wake-up call.
A wake-up call to what?
To the fragility of our democracy and the need to safeguard it against those who would seek to undermine it from within.
And it's not just external threats.
No, it's the threats from within that we need to be most worried about.
Because they're harder to see.
They're insidious.
Yeah.
They operate in the shadows.
And they chip away at our democracy.
Bit by bit.
Bit by bit.
Until it's too late.
And the article reminds us that the erosion of democratic norms doesn't happen overnight.
It's a gradual process.
Yeah.
Often fueled by misinformation, division, and the exploitation of fear and anger.
Like a slow drip.
It is a slow poison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That eventually kills the body politic.
That's a powerful image. And the article concludes by emphasizing the importance of vigilance.
Vigilance against what?
Against all of these things.
Yeah.
The misinformation.
The manipulation.
The division.
The fear.
Yeah, we need to be aware of what's happening around us.
And we need to be willing to speak out against it.
No, stand up for our democracy.
To defend it.
Yeah. Because if we don't, we could very well end up in a world that looks a lot like 1984.
A world we don't want to live in.
And the article leaves us with this final provocative thought.
Okay.
The choice between a free and open society and a society ruled by fear, control, and conformity is a choice we make every day in both big and small ways.
It's a powerful statement.
What steps can we take individually and collectively to ensure that Orwell's dystopian vision does not become our reality?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
And it's a question we need to answer with our actions.
Because the future of our democracy depends on it.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a really thought-provoking deep dive.
It was.
I think we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
And I hope our listeners found it informative.
Me too.
And engaging.
As always, thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.